Hi everyone, my name is Allie and welcome to my channel, and today is going to be a little bit of an all over the place kind of video. I mean, we're going to be talking about queer books, books that I want to recommend, books that I am planning on reading, whether in June or the rest of the year. But we do have quite a lot of books to get through. I'm going to start off with the recommendations, so if you're only here for recommendations, perfect. This is going to be the first part of the video, and then the second part of the video will be some of the books that I would like to read for either June, which is Pride Month, or just the rest of the year in general. Because it's very important to me to read queer books at any point in the year, not just during Pride Month, and I hope that that is applicable to everybody watching this video. I'm not going to take too long on any sort of introduction. That is all you're getting, and we're going to start off actually with the books that I physically own and would like to recommend. So I have my little stack, and the first book that I want to recommend is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. And this book is actually part of a series of sapphic books that are semi-connected, but this is a sapphic romance book between a lesbian character and a bisexual character, and it is obviously by Ashley Herring Blake, who is typically a YA author. She actually wrote one of my favorite sapphic books of all time, How to Make a Wish. It was actually one of the very first sapphic books that I'd ever read, way back when, and I love that book so much, and it was so exciting to see her jump into adult romance. And I read this book last year and it was absolutely fantastic and so well worth the hype. I know that everybody recommends this book, so I'm not gonna like take a whole long time with it, but all the hype that it gets is so well deserved, and I highly recommend checking out this book if you're looking for like a steamy queer romance, because it is very steamy. So to get out of adult romance really quickly, we are going to jump into Everything Leads to You by Nina LaCour. So this is actually the very first sapphic book I had ever read, ever. This book actually surprised me because I remember people talking about it on BookTube way back in the day, like 2014, 2015, and I don't remember anybody mentioning that this was sapphic. Like, people would say, oh, I'm gonna read this book, or oh, I just bought this book, but they never really mentioned the queer representation in this book, and that was kind of back when like very few people ever talked about the actual representation in the books that they were going to read, which I'm glad that we have definitely changed that over the very long years that I've been on BookTube. But I picked this book up and I read it while listening to Red by Taylor Swift. I was about to say Red Taylor's version. I was like, I was not reading I was not listening to Red Taylor's version back then, but I was listening to Red by Taylor Swift and reading this book on the bus, and I remember getting to the part where she talks about her ex-girlfriend, and I was like, wait. I had to read it like 25 times just to make sure that what I was reading was accurate, and I was like, wait, this is a sapphic book. What? This completely opened up my entire brain to queer literature back in like 2014, 2015. I can never truly remember what year I read this book in, but I know that it was quite a while ago, and I loved it so much. It's so iconic. Nina LaCour is such an amazing author of so many queer books. Like, We Are Okay is another one of my all-time favorite queer books, but that one I feel like you should read if you want to really cry, like really have a breakdown. This one is a little bit less breakdowny, a little bit less cry-y, but it's so cinematic. It's so beautiful. It's set in LA. It has a lot to do with the movie industry, and I actually read some of this to my brother and he was like, where's the movie? And I completely agree with him. Where is this movie? Where is the movie adaptation to Everything Leads to You? And it would be so beautiful because it already is so cinematic. It just works, and Taylor Swift would totally be on the soundtrack, like easily. Sorry, I get really excited about these queer books. They mean a lot to me. I love them. The next book I want to recommend is another one that I actually read last year for Pride Month, and that is If It Makes You Happy by Claire Kahn. I love this book. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, and it does a really great job at exploring queer platonic relationships. It was so enlightening and so interesting, And Claire Kahn is just one of those authors that whenever I pick up one of her books, they just instantly make me happy. Like, I remember reading her book, Let's Talk About Love, which has asexual representation, which I also highly recommend, and loving that book and having so much fun and really feeling seen by that book because the main character is biromantic asexual, and I fall somewhere along those lines. And I love that book, and I absolutely love this one as well. It's really cute. It has a fat main character, which I absolutely love, and I love getting to find books with fat representation and queer representation. It's a good book. I highly recommend. Also, she is so cute on the cover. I love when they make the fat models look cute instead of looking frumpy. Like, she looks adorable and like trendy and cute. So the next book I want to recommend is actually another one I read last year. I read so many good queer books in 2022. Actually, did I read this in 2022 or 2021? No, it's definitely 2022 because that was when I was trying to do my YA fantasy reading vlog, and that just kind of fell through the cracks. But I did manage to read this book, and that is Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. This is a chonker of a book, but it's also really, really amazing and has some great asexual representation and also lesbian representation, which we love. I love to see it, especially in YA fantasy and just fantasy in general. It's so much fun to read queer representation. This book was so much fun. It has like this really unreliable, semi-unlikable female narrator, and she is hilarious and so much fun to read from. And she makes a lot of mistakes, but she is an icon and a legend. And the sequel actually just came out, and I believe that this is a duology. So if you want to read this book and you're the type of person who needs to like wait for the sequel to come out or wait for the series to be complete before reading the first book, this would be like the perfect time for you to read this book, because I'm pretty sure that the duology is complete, and I'm pretty sure that it is a duology. If I'm wrong, I will put in like a little addendum right here. But yeah, I highly recommend this book. It's so good, so much fun. And I mean, I can't recommend the sequel. I haven't read it yet because Hoopla, my library, has not put it up yet. Not on Libby, not on Hoopla or anything, so I have to wait for my library to get it. But I loved this book. It was so good. And my next recommendation for a book that I physically own is actually one that I'm currently rereading and having such an amazing time rereading, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. And this book has a lot of bisexual representation. Both Addie and Henry are bisexual, and that is explored on page. So if you are looking for some bisexual representation in contemporary / historical fantasy, this would be perfect for you. I absolutely love this book. It physically, mentally, emotionally destroys me every time I think about it. And if you are also a fan of Folklore by Taylor Swift, that might be a little bit of an incentive to pick up this book, because this is folklore coded. It's also Evermore coded. So either way, if you like folklore or Evermore or both, this is your book. This is your book. Why haven't you read it yet? Why haven't you read it yet? This is Cardigan coded. This is Ivy coded. This is Cowboy Like Me coded. Like, pick it up. Pick it up. It's so good. I can't say enough good things about The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Like, I could literally talk about it forever, and I actually do have a video review of that book, so I could link that down below if you want to hear more of my in-depth thoughts on it. But I do believe it's a little bit spoilery. I can't remember, so watch it at your own risk. Now getting into some of the books that I would like to recommend that I don't own but I did read last year, because like I said, I read so many queer books last year. It is wild. So I have like 10 books to recommend. I'm gonna go through them a little bit quicker than these other books, but just know that I recommend them all pretty much equally. They're so good. So the first book that I'd like to recommend is Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. And if you are looking for a much shorter read, this would be a really great book to add to your TBR for June, because it is super short. It's just a little novella. It goes by really fast. I listened to the audiobook, and I believe that the audiobook is maybe an hour and a half long, if that. So it was like done in a flash, but it's really good. I believe that it's set in like the 1930s, 1940s era. It has this sort of like detective vibe to it. It's sapphic. It's really, really great. I love C.L. Polk so much. Their book, The Midnight Bargain, is another one of my favorite books of all time, but that one has a little bit less queer representation, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for this video, but it is a really good book. And yeah, Even Though I Knew the End is absolutely fantastic and beautifully written. The next book is actually a memoir, and that is We Have Always Been Here by Samra Habib. And I read this last year, like I said, and it was absolutely phenomenal. It was such an interesting look into the life of someone who is both queer and Muslim, and her relationship with her parents, especially her mom, and how that relationship has shifted and changed over the years, and how they have grown apart and also grown closer. And I thought that it was absolutely beautiful, and there were so many parts that just like really hit me deep in my soul. And I mean, I love a good memoir, so there will be a few other memoirs on this list, but this is the first one that I recommend, and it is so good. The next book is one of my favorite books that I read last year. I can't remember if I put it on my favorites video, but I feel like I did, and that is Nevada by Imogen Binney. And this book is a semi-autobiographical novel, which I absolutely loved getting to see this author explore parts of her life through this like fictional narrative. I thought it was so interesting, and I love when authors do this, when it's like semi-autobiographical. It just works so well for me. It's like almost a memoir, but it's not. And basically this book is about a young transgender woman, and she ends up meeting this older transgender woman at her work. She works at like a Walmart, and their lives kind of intersect, and the older transgender woman becomes sort of a mentor to the younger transgender woman, and it follows both of their narratives. So you do get to see both of these characters kind of live their lives and see how they come together and then how they come apart. It's absolutely amazing. It's absolutely beautiful. It's also kind of a shorter read, I believe. I think it was like 6 hours long or something like that, so reading it at 2 times speed, it was like 3 hours long, 3.5 hours, something like that. And I absolutely loved it. I thought it was fantastic, and I highly recommend it. It's a book that I do not see a lot of people recommending or even talking about, and I think it's criminally underrated. Such a good book. Another one that is pretty criminally underrated for me as well is Tin Man by Sarah Winman. This book emotionally destroyed me. This book explores a lot of the complexities of like queerness and friendships and relationships, and how all of those things intersect and react with one another. And also it's told in the backdrop of like the AIDS epidemic, and it just is so haunting, so beautifully written. And I love the exploration of friendships in this book, and how deep those friendships are, and how deep just like not only like the platonic love but also the romantic love, and just like everything mixed together. It's so beautiful. Highly recommend it. The next book that I would like to recommend is Book Boyfriend by Chris Ripper, and I actually read 2 Chris Ripper books last year, and I really enjoyed both of them, but I think I liked Book Boyfriend a little bit more. The other book that I read from him was The Hate Project, which actually has a fat main character, which I did like that aspect of that book, but I did kind of prefer Book Boyfriend just a little bit more. And this one follows a novelist, and he is kind of a little obsessed with this guy that he has a crush on, and he ends up writing a little bit of like almost like a real life fanfic of him and this guy he has a crush on, and he gets it published and it becomes a massive hit. And yeah, it's really messy. It's really funny, and the main character is a little bit insufferable, but kind of in the best way. So I mean, if you don't like insufferable characters, this might not be for you, but I also think that this character is so charming and so funny and so awkward that it just works. And yeah, I love this book so much, and I definitely want to read more from Chris Ripper in the future. This one was, though, I will say, a little bit less steamy. I mean, quite a lot, a bit less steamy than The Hate Project. So if you're looking for something that has a lot of smut in it, a lot of like sexy scenes, go for The Hate Project. I mean, the sexy scenes were like right off the bat and they were really good, but this one has considerably less sexy scenes, so it just kind of depends on what you're looking for. The next book I want to recommend is You Exist Too Much by Zaina Arafat, and this is a really, really great literary fiction book, and it follows this sapphic Palestinian woman and young woman. She's like in her 20s, and it's very much just like coming of age, finding yourself, very much like Sally Rooney-esque. So if you like Sally Rooney books, you might really enjoy this one. I thought it was really good, one of my favorite literary fiction books. And it's another one of those books that I just like do not hear people talk about, and more people should. It's so beautifully written, but I will say trigger warning for eating disorders, because the main character does go into treatment for her eating disorder. And I think that that's really important to know before going into it. I personally have had a history with eating disorders, and I really enjoyed this book and thought that the representation was pretty good, and I didn't really feel super triggered by it, but I know that everybody's different, so just go into that with the knowledge. The next book is another memoir. I told you I would have more memoirs on this list, and that is Broken Horses by Brandi Carlile. She is a lesbian country artist and one of my favorite country artists. She is so amazing, so good, so iconic. She's also one of the members of the country group The Highwomen, which also has Maren Morris and a few other country artists that I cannot remember off the top of my head, but I love Brandi Carlile. I love her music, and I especially loved this memoir. It was so amazing. I loved getting to hear her talk about her life and growing up, and she grew up in like basically poverty, and I just thought it was so interesting to hear from her perspective and get to hear about her journey and how she met her wife and all of this stuff. So I absolutely loved it. I highly recommend it. One of my favorite memoirs. Another really great memoir is Andre Leon Talley's memoir. It's called The Chiffon Trenches, and if you don't know who Andre Leon Talley is, you obviously did not grow up watching America's Next Top Model like I did, and you didn't grow up reading Vogue like I did. I had a massive obsession with fashion and style and all that kind of stuff, so I read a lot of Vogue when I was younger, and I also watched a lot of America's Next Top Model, which is how I knew about Andre Leon Talley. He is an icon and a legend. He unfortunately passed away last year, which was absolutely tragic. The fashion industry, the world, lost such an incredible icon. And this memoir is absolutely phenomenal, and there's also a documentary, I believe, on HBO Max, but I can't really remember it. I think it's at HBO Max. I think it's the same name, but there is a documentary that you could watch as well, which I really liked. But yeah, Andre Leon Talley, he is an icon and a legend, and he did so much for specifically like styling and Vogue and all that kind of stuff. And this memoir, just at the end of the day, was so much fun, so messy, so intriguing. He has a lot of tea about the fashion industry, and I think that it's really interesting to hear it come from his own words and from his own voice. He did narrate the memoir, so if you want to go listen to the audiobook, I highly recommend it. Second to last book that I would like to recommend is Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. This is an adult romance, semi-literary fiction, I would say, but it's really a romance at its heart, and it's absolutely beautiful. Like, this writing will knock you off your feet. It's absolutely gorgeous. I described it as being kind of like Taylor Swift lyrics, so if you're a Taylor Swift fan, you might really enjoy Honey Girl. It's so beautifully written, and I loved the sapphic relationship in this book. It just worked so well, and it was so beautiful. Like, I literally cannot give you a better description of this book. It's just so gorgeous. Even listening to it as an audiobook, it hit me. It really affected me, and I remember just being like, I did not expect to cry this much while reading this book, but I did. This book will absolutely make you cry, so like, have the tissues very close by, and it's amazing. It's iconic. I mean, what else can I say? And the last book I'd like to recommend is actually a YA book, and that is If This Gets Out by Sophie Gonzalez and Cale Dietrich. And I read this book pretty early on into 2022, and I actually did really like this book. It's interesting because it's kind of a little bit of a boy band fanfic, so if you're into boy bands, you might really enjoy this book. And if you've read books like Kill the Boy Band or also Grace and the Fever, you might really enjoy this book. This one is about two boys that are in a boy band and they end up falling in love and having this secret relationship, and it's really cute and a little messy, but at its heart it's just really adorable, and I absolutely loved the romance between these two characters, and I loved the other band members. They were so funny and they were so supportive and so sweet. And yeah, I just absolutely love this book. I think that it's another one of those books that kind of went under the radar a little bit, but you know me, I love to read books that are about music, and so any book that's about music will be on my radar. And I thought it was kind of fun to get to explore what it might look like to be in a relationship when you're in a band. Okay, so those are all the books that I'd like to recommend. If that's all you're here for, then see you later. But now we're going to talk about a few of the books that I might want to read in June. I can't be sure that I will get to all of them, but I will absolutely try. That's all I can say. That's all I can promise. So the first book that I'd like to get to in June is Malice by Heather Walter. And I kind of picked this book for the tentative TBR because I have been in a massive fantasy mood lately. I don't know why. I've just been reading so many fantasy books. It's wild. And this is a really interesting fantasy book. It's kind of a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, but it has this sort of villain origin story, and it's also sapphic. It's really fun. One of the quotes on the back of the book from the Oprah magazine says, "Walter's spellbinding debut is for all the queer girls and women who have been told to keep their gifts hidden and for those yearning to defy gravity." So I'm really excited to read this book, and I know that I have the audiobook on Hoopla, so if I want to read it physically, I have the physical book. If I'd like to listen to the audiobook, I also have that. So I am really excited to read this book, and hopefully it will quench my thirst for fantasy books. The next book I would like to read is actually one that I have been wanting to read for quite a while, and it is not fantasy, and that is Less by Andrew Sean Greer. I have been wanting to read this book for quite a while, ever since I heard Carly from UnCarly talk about it. It's one of her favorite books, and I'm hoping that it'll be one of my favorite books. It's also the winner of the Pulitzer Prize, which is pretty impressive, if I do say so myself. And this book is basically about an author, and he is running away from all of his problems. He has been invited to his ex-boyfriend's wedding, and he is like, hell no, I am going to completely avoid that and go on a tour for my book. And that's what he does, and I am so intrigued to read this book. I think I'm really going to like it, and I don't know if I'll try to find the audiobook for this one or if I'm going to read it physically, but either way it will get read, and I'm so excited. The next one is actually a YA book, which, I mean, I do enjoy my YA every once in a while, and that is Darius the Great is Not Okay by Adib Khorram. And I've had this book for quite a while, and I actually have the sequel as well. So if I want to do a little bit of like a back-to-back sort of thing, I can totally do that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that there is fat representation in this book. I could be completely incorrect. Darius has never really fit in at home, and he's sure things are going to be the same in Iran. His clinical depression doesn't exactly help matters, and trying to explain his medication to his grandparents only makes things harder. So it doesn't really say when he's sent there, at least I don't think so. Oh no, wait. His first ever trip to Iran is about to change his life. Okay, it doesn't really say when. I'm guessing summer, because he's in school, so the only time that kids have time off to go on a vacation is either during the summer or during Christmas, so I don't really know. But I am really excited to read this book, and I've heard great things. And the very last book that would be on this tentative TBR is Memorial by Brian Washington, which is another one of UnCarly's favorite books. And I actually did buy this book because of UnCarly as well, so I'm really excited to read this one. This is a book that I never really know how to explain because it's kind of complicated. Like, it doesn't really fully make sense in my brain, and I don't know how to explain it in like a concise fashion. But basically it's about this couple, and one of them has to go see his estranged father who is dying, and he lives in Osaka, so he has to go all the way over there. But then when he's over there, his mom comes to the US and I believe has to spend time with the guy, her son's boyfriend. See, it's really, I don't know why I can't explain this book for some reason. My brain just doesn't work that way. I don't know why I can't explain this book. It's so embarrassing. But yeah, I'm really excited to read this book. I think it's going to do a lot of exploration of family and queerness and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really excited to read it. I think it's going to be amazing, and I've heard great things. Alright, so those are all the books that I recommend for Pride Month, or really for any time of the year, because I think that we should all be reading queer books at any time of the year. For June, I don't believe that I'm going to be reading solely queer books the entire month. So reading them all in June sounds a little counterintuitive, but I mean, there are quite a few books that I would like to get to, and I think even ones that I didn't mention. So we'll see what my TBR ends up being, but I mean, I do want to read some of these books very, very soon. I hope that this was helpful in some sort of way. Maybe you needed some queer recommendations, and hopefully these gave you some good recommendations. If you have read any books that you love that are queer, leave them down below in the comments. I would love to check them out and see if maybe I would also be interested in reading them. And maybe they will also be helpful to some of my other viewers. And yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and if you did, go ahead and give it a huge thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, Storygraph, TikTok. All the links are down below, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye! Ooh,